What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Sakura D3 CS Sport build series. This video is video 3 and it's going to take care of steps 7 through 8 in the manual, so let's jump back in and get started. Step 7 takes care of the front and rear bulkhead covers, and we're also going to take care of mounting the front and rear shock towers. We're going to start on the front of the chassis, and the first thing we're going to do is to prep the front shock tower for mounting. We're going to install the ball studs and everything so we can hook up the turnbuckles and mount the shocks when they're ready. Now that the front shock tower is prepped and ready to go, we're going to screw it to the front bulkhead covers. We're only going to screw the screws in partially. We're going to make sure it's flush with the back side of it so it's ready to slide down and mount to the chassis. Now that we have this assembly ready to go, we're going to slide it down onto the chassis over the front bulkheads, and we're going to use a pair of pliers or a pair of tweezers to slide these M3 nuts into the groove. And since we already have the screws threaded all the way up to that point, once we get those nuts in there, we can just tighten them down and they should be catch with the threads and they should be good to go. Now we can move on to mounting the included spur gear that came with the kit. It is a 48 pitch 80 tooth gear. This just slides on and goes down with 4 screws. It's very simple. We just want to be careful not to over tighten the screws since this is plastic. With the front of the chassis done, it's time to move on to the rear of the chassis. This is going to be a little less complicated than the front. The rear shock tower is going to assemble pretty much identical to the front with a few minor changes. And then when we go to mount the rear bulkhead covers, it's going to be a lot simpler than the front. So we've got the rear shock tower mounted to the rear bulkhead covers, and now we're going to mount that to the chassis. It just goes down with 4 screws. You don't have to fiddle with sliding any nuts into any slots or anything, so it's a lot more simple. With step 7 complete, we can now move on to step 8, which is the rear upright, front knuckle, and upper linkage. The first step we're going to want to do is to assemble all of our linkages so we have them ready to go. There's 3 different sizes. You're going to have to make 2 of each, so 6 total. Just go ahead and screw your ball caps onto the turnbuckles and get them to the correct sizes, and we should be good to go. Starting with the rear of the chassis, we want to place the 2 bearings into the rear uprights. Then we want to screw a 4.8mm ball stud into the top of the rear uprights. We are then ready to insert the universal shaft into the rear upright. This assembly is then ready to attach to the chassis. We're going to use an M3x25 pin. This is going to go through the lower control arm, through the rear upright, and then it's going to be set in place with an M3x6 set screw that goes into the middle of it and inserts into that groove when you tighten it down. With the upright and the universal shaft installed, we can then take the turnbuckle that we made with the 11mm gap, and we can pop it onto those ball cups on both sides, and then the rear is done. We can move on to the front. The first thing we want to do for the front end is going to be to screw a 4.8mm ball stud into the knuckle arm. Next, we're going to insert two bearings into the knuckle arm, one on each side. This next part can be a little tricky. We need to insert an M5x7x5.5 flange tube into both the upper and lower holes on the C-hub. I find it's easy if you just hold the C-hub parallel to the ground. This will keep gravity from being your enemy, and it'll help those flange tubes stay in place while we insert the prepped knuckle arm and universal shaft. And then the bottom gets screwed in with an M3x10 button screw, and the top is a 4.8mm ball stud. This assembly is now ready to install on the front end of the vehicle. Goes on the same way as the rear. We're just going to shove a pin through it, through the control arm and the C-hub, and we're going to lock it in place with the set screw. This is going to go through the center of the C-hub and capture the pin at the groove in the middle of it. The final step is going to be installing the turnbuckles or linkages. They just pop onto the ball studs, very easy. The 1.5mm gap goes on the steering, and the 8mm gap turnbuckles go for your camber adjustment. Well, that brings us to the end of build video 3 for steps 7 and 8 of the Sakura D3 CS Sport build. I just want to thank you guys for watching and stay tuned for more.